Hello and welcome to the Field Engineer channel. My name is Caroline Gregory, and on this channel we discuss topics of interest to field engineers and field managers. I have with me today Sarah Nicastro. Sarah is based in the US in Pennsylvania, and she has a degree in psychology, an MBA, and a rich career in publishing, editing, and field service. Some of you listening will know her from the Future Field Service or from her Unscripted podcast. Welcome, Sarah. We are very happy to have you here with us today.
Happy to be here, Caroline. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's start then, Sarah. If you're happy, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So you mentioned I live in Pennsylvania. I live in a city called Erie, which is right on Lake Erie. And I live here with my husband, Eric, and our two sons, Evan, who is newly 11, and Ellis, who is 9, but will be 10 in the fall, as well as our two cats, Atticus and Popcorn. And a little about me, I love to read. I love to travel and explore new places and new things near and far. I love to spend time outside, particularly when it isn't snowing here. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess is it very hot where you are at the moment?
It has been, yes. I know.
Okay.
Similar to the UK and a lot of Europe, it's been kind of uncharacteristically warm this summer. It's actually storming here today, so there's a cooler front moving in, yeah, but it's been quite warm this summer.
Now, I wondered, because you mentioned the snow, and I thought, particularly for field service engineering, any weather that's extreme, either cold or hot, it just makes life more difficult, whether they're working in a building or outside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's go back to when you studied. How did you decide to study psychology? And now, with hindsight, was it the right choice for you? And also, has it been a thread throughout your career that you can see now, again, with hindsight?
Yeah. This is such an interesting question to me, Caroline, because, I often think about, obviously, as an adult, it's easy to look back and think how young we are when we're meant to choose what we're going to do as a career or for the rest of our lives. So I actually began college as a nursing major, and I pretty quickly realized that was not for me, but I switched to psychology without much of a plan because I really enjoyed my freshman psychology class. So I would say in hindsight, that was done in a quite naive way. I chose it because I enjoyed it. I wasn't necessarily thinking about the career paths or options or, what the long-term goal was. But I also, I don't have any regrets. I have continually and continually done the best I could with what I know at the time, and that's what I was doing then. And I do believe that it has had a fundamental through line in my career. I think there are just concepts that I learned in those studies that have set me up really well for what I've ended up doing professionally.
Okay. Well, I guess choosing something because you really enjoy it, maybe that's not naive. Maybe that's very, very wise.
Yeah,
for you as
that's a good point.
Yeah. So then from that, you started working for a field engineering publication and have been championing field service ever since then. Why has this been such a passion for you?
Yeah. So I happened into that role in 2008, and I really only expected it to be a pit stop, if you will, not necessarily a destination. But I quite quickly became intrigued by the shifts that were underway at that time in service, as well as the in my opinion, very unique role that service teams and leaders play within the business at the intersection of the company and customers. There's been obviously so much progress since then, but I think that in many organizations, the potential impact of service knowledge and those relationships remains somewhat untapped. So that's been one reason that I think I've continued to stay in this space and champion it. We know that there are a shortage of workers entering many or most of the industries that keep our world running. And I think it's, I learned when I came into this space, there's an entire sort of behind the scenes universe of skills and effort and careers that we're never shown as examples when we're growing up of, what all we can consider when we are asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? There's sort of this handful of default answers, but there's this whole broader world in field service that we don't necessarily see or know to consider. So I've really enjoyed understanding that world myself and helping play a role in championing, the potential that exists there and the incredible impact that service has on the broader business world.
Oh, okay, thank you. And I suppose it surprised me since I've been involved with the field engineer, how often I see field engineers now, wherever I go. I guess I'm more attuned to them, but of course, in somewhere like a hospital, there aren't just the medical field engineers. There'll be somebody fixing the catering equipment, fixing the air conditioning, etc., etc., etc. Yes.
Yeah, and I think even when you don't see the individuals at work, when you're aware of them, you see all of those interaction points, right? So you can look around a room and see different equipment is serviced, by those folks. Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's interesting, and it's also quite reassuring, I think, to be moving around and thinking there's an army of people, but they are not always acknowledged, as you said. Oh, and for some people, it's a wonderful career that is not perhaps picked up on with careers services and so on.
Right. Yeah. I recently did an interview with a woman who is a field engineer, and she actually went to school to be a doctor because she felt that was, she wanted to pursue a medical career. And like I mentioned earlier, we're only given this small sample of options, that we kind of know to choose from when we're young. And so as she went to school to get her degree, her medical degree, she started to realize she actually didn't want to practice medicine. So she went into the research side, and then through that became aware of the equipment in the labs and the career opportunity, and now has transitioned to field service. So we had a very interesting conversation about how for every one role that we know as an example when we're young, so in this case, doctor, there could be dozens of roles that kind of go along with that we just don't know by name or necessarily think to consider.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And of course she ended up still helping people medically, just in a different way than she had originally thought. Interesting.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about field service, I think, is that you can think about that in any context. Like, say that you love sports and you want to become a professional athlete. Obviously, that's only a real viable option for a very few amount of people, right? But when you think about, all of the things that go into that universe, the stadiums and, everything that's serviced there, or, these different aspects of that universe, you can start to look at where field service kind of plugs into that, and it's quite interesting.
It's very interesting, and that you can still then be part of it. Sports are a very good example of that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And
sure.
I suppose the future of field service is very, very key to your career and what you do. And I understand it's nearly 8 years old. Is that correct?
Yes. Hard to
Yeah.
believe, but true. Yeah.
It's got a birthday coming up.
Mhm.
How has it changed over those 8 years, do you feel? And how do you see its future in terms of change and development?
Yeah, great question. So it's grown tremendously. And in our aim to share insights with service leaders, the platform has helped me learn so much as well. The community is really what makes Future of Field Service truly special. So you always hear service as a people business, and people are why I love what I do all of these years later. So we have now published more than 370 podcast episodes. We've hosted live events in locations all over the world. We're in our third year of our annual Standout 50 Leadership Awards.
Mhm.
We have continued to listen to our audience in what they value and what they want, and have looked for different ways to provide that. I have no real interest in claiming I can predict the future. But what I do know is that, I think the power of community is only becoming more crucial. And the opportunity for service leaders to learn from peers across industries and across geographies has, I think, limitless potential. So
Mhm.
I'm really excited to see, what the future holds.
Okay, so you mentioned the power of community and being so
Mhm.
vital. Are you saying that because so many people are now working remotely, rarely going into an office and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if we bring it back to, the field engineer audience, even before remote work was a big topic, they
Mhm.
were remotely working, right? And
Mhm.
so in certain situations, I mean, that can be isolating. I think,
Yes.
as remote work has expanded, that has been one factor. But I think, with progression of the digital landscape and
Mhm.
increasing use of AI, we just have this need within us for human connection. And I think
Mhm.
that this idea of, learning from people that are in similar situations but have different experiences, different viewpoints is very powerful. And spending time with human beings,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
whatever form or capacity is possible, I think is really a good thing for folks.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose as well, it's more memorable if you're as a field engineer, you're hit with an issue and you think, I remember a story my friend or my contact told me about when a similar thing happened to them. This is how
Hmm.
they solved it, and
Yeah.
it has the richness of humanity in it. Then,
Yeah. You
um,
know, Caroline, one thing I've took note of over the last couple of years is, service leaders who have shared with me that despite the complexity or the cost, they
mhm.
invest maybe once a year in bringing all of their field teams together in person.
Okay, okay.
And if you think about what you just described, when you are at a job site and you have a question or you get stuck and you need help, the ability to reach out to someone who even once a year you see in
Mhm.
person or have met, on some level. And of course, there are many ways to foster ongoing relationship
Mhm.
beyond just getting people together once a year, and I think that is really helpful for leaders to consider. But yeah, I think it's really there's something powerful about that, knowing you're connected to these other people that are doing the same
Yes,
job, and you have
yes.
a community to lean on even if you don't see them often at all.
But they understand you and
Hmm.
they will support you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So let's go back to storytelling because looking at your career, it seems that storytelling's always been important to you. Of course, storytelling's ancient and we can see it in all cultures throughout history. Why do you think it's so vital in communication and life in general in 2026 particularly?
Yeah. So storytelling is very important to me, and I believe that we all have a story to share. So often, with the podcast, especially, I feel my role is to help each individual that is coming on to, really discover or uncover what their story is. So a lot of times, we start the conversation. I don't know what I have to say. I don't know what there is to talk about. And I think there's always something, right? And so I like to help people find the best way to convey their knowledge, experiences, opinions. And I find that stories resonate so well because they give people something to connect to, and they make whatever information is being shared more memorable. I think in relation to 2026 specifically, so we're in the AI era, and genuine, I think genuine storytelling becomes more vital because it helps us relate to one another. It strikes an emotional chord that enables a message to land and to stick. And the further we get in leveraging AI's potential, I think the more we're going to crave authenticity and humanity and connection. And storytelling is a really powerful tool to deliver those things.
Okay. I guess as well in most stories, it's not perfect. There's imperfection in there, isn't there? And something perhaps happened in a way, particularly fixing equipment. Maybe something worked that actually, as per the manual, shouldn't.
Right.
Shouldn't work, but it did work, and there is a way around this. And that's powerful in a story, isn't it?
Yeah,
That sort of
absolutely.
thing. Yes.
Imperfection. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to relate to in imperfection and a lot to learn from,
Oh yes, and it's sometimes it's also has a bit of entertainment value about it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so we've talked about all the different things you're doing. One other thing, which is a new venture, and I know you juggle a lot of things, but a new venture is the future of assets. What's the story behind that, Sarah?
Yeah, so, we've seen over the last almost 8 years, as you mentioned, how impactful it has been to offer service leaders a space to come and learn from one another, to share across industries. I think there's, a lot of opportunity to gain different seeds of insight and information, from others. And so the idea with Future of Assets is to extend that same impact to leaders who are in asset management and maintenance. So, basically taking what's worked with the sort of cross industry, across geography approach of Future of Field Service, and try and create the same opportunity for leaders in the asset management and maintenance space. I think there historically has been this tendency to seek education from within one's own industry, and have aspirations of being perhaps the best in an industry. But there's, I think, an increasing need to look beyond your own industry for, there's increasing competitive pressures, there's, differing customer expectations, and those are being shaped by experiences that individuals have from a variety of industries. So, looking for insights and education beyond your own industry, I think is important and powerful. So that's, one of the big objectives we have with these platforms.
Because it's, I suppose, looking beyond your particular sphere or industry or geographical area is so enriching because very much more comes into it.
Yeah, it's really good food for thought. I always tell people, at an event per se, like, no one that is sharing their experiences here today is going to give you a blueprint for what you need to do exactly or prescriptively to go and solve all of your problems, right? But collectively throughout the day, if you can pick up these little points of, I never thought of it that way, or wow, maybe that could work in this way in our organization, that adds up to something really big sometimes. So throughout our content that we publish and the podcast conversations as well as events, that's really the objective we're driving towards.
So it's very positive, all of it.
Yeah.
Let's go back to really what you spoke about at the beginning, because when I asked you to introduce yourself, you very quickly mentioned your two sons who are now 11 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know motherhood is very important to you. This is a very difficult question, probably the most difficult one I'm going to ask you. Sarah, how do you balance your life? And from that, do you have any advice for others about balancing work and parenthood?
Yeah.
You're in this 3-month long school summer vacation at the moment as well. So it's perhaps a good time for the question.
It's definitely testing my sanity for sure. So Caroline, this is a very tough question. I think the instinct is to figure out what sort of PR-ish, palatable sort of answer I could give you that, quite frankly, would be complete BS. The truth is that balance isn't always realistic or even possible. And the truth to your question is that, making it this far has often meant putting myself last. And so I'm learning more about my tendency to do that and how to do differently. But it's very much a work in progress. So I don't feel well equipped to give, sort of a glossy answer on balance. And I definitely do not have it all figured out. I'm just doing the best I can at every given moment. But there are a couple of truths that I've learned or uncovered. And so rather than advice, I guess I would say what those are. And the first is, I think it's so important to let go of the pressure of perfection and the trap of comparison. And often we put the most of that on ourselves, but I do not want to, I refuse to put the onus on parents for all of that, because there are a lot of things societally that create unrealistic expectations of working parents and working moms specifically. But I think if you want to, quote, balance a career and motherhood, you have to figure out how to not succumb to the guilt of not making every meal from scratch, or the, inclination to compare yourself at the children's Halloween party with your store-bought costume to this handmade costume that another mom made, or what have you, and maybe it sounds simple, but it's very hard, right? But all of those, pressures to be perfect, or this comparison game, it's all expending energy that, quite frankly, you need to be using toward your balancing act, right? Yes. So that's one big one. The second is that no phase is permanent. And so I think that is always helpful to remember. Often it seems more important to remember when things feel impossible, right? So to remember it's not permanent, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. But I think it's equally important to remember when things feel entirely doable, or even sort of, in a moment where things feel, picturesque, is that stop and bask in that glory, because that too will pass, and you're
Yes.
going to find yourself back in a moment that feels impossible, so just really learning to, I guess, practice radical acceptance, is a big part of it.
That's a really interesting answer, and I think perhaps the most powerful thing you said is that there isn't a solution, and that all the people who are juggling work and parenthood, there isn't a solution that they've just not found. It's a case of managing different situations as they happen, and also you can be as prepared as you want, which of course is the contrast with field service, and something happens that's unexpected. And I know recently you had to dash to the hospital because one of your sons had an accident, and and you had to get from an airport to back, which again, you can't prepare for anything like that, can you?
No, and probably more notably, Caroline, I've shared this on social media. When my older son Evan, who's 11 now, was 3 years old, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which was a huge unexpected life change, and something that we we contend with every day. So, those things do happen. And I think, it goes back to the radical acceptance and just understanding we as humans control a lot less than we want to think we do, right? And so, that's a big part of it. I think, the other thing is, as parents, we often say, or at least I've often said, like, oh, I wish there was just, a user manual or a guidebook for how to do this, right? Like, there, of course, isn't. The flip side that is positive to that is what that also means is there's no one right way to do it, right? So it goes back to that comparison. Like, there's no, of course, there are certain standards you want to aspire to in terms of, how you make sure your children feel safe and loved and cared for. But beyond that, there is no prescriptive way to do the job well. And so, you can, make it work the way you need to make it work for your family. And, it can be perfectly imperfect, I guess.
And with that, wonderful. And perhaps also going back to your description of why you love storytelling. Of course, you, rather than, as there isn't a manual, not even AI has come up with a manual for parenthood yet. Stories from other parents of, this is what happened to us, this is how we dealt with it, this is our story. And you can learn from that. You can take snippets, can't you? And think, and I do that.
That's also why I wanted to give an honest answer to your question, right? Because I think, one of the things about storytelling that I'm reminded about regularly is that when individuals are willing to be honest and be vulnerable, it has a ripple effect in a lot of ways. I interviewed a woman, Patricia Sabera, who is an SVP at UNSCRIPTED the past year. And, she's someone that I would look at, quote, on paper or on social media and think, oh my gosh, she must have it all together, And when I asked her a very similar question to yours about the balancing act, she said, like, I don't balance at all. I just, do whatever I can in the moment. And a lot of times that means we have McDonald's for dinner, or my daughter shows up to school without her homework done because I forgot the night before. And, but I know that she knows how loved she is. And, and it was just her willingness to be so honest. I mean, I even found myself like letting out a deep breath, and thinking, like, that's such a gift to give other people, when they look at someone, and when we only let people see our highlight reel, we reinforce that comparison trap or that feeling of putting pressure to be perfect, because we're only showing the very best.
Yes.
You know, so when we're willing to be honest and say like, oh, well, you know, it's okay. Here's a time that I completely bombed at something, or, you know, it helps us connect to the fact that, you know, there is no one that has it all sorted out and is doing a perfect job. It's not possible, you know.
Yes.
So
yeah, it's and you manage how you manage, and some of the times when it's not been perfect create some wonderful memories, don't they? So yeah. Okay, thank you, Sarah, for being so honest, because
of course
it's not, honesty is very refreshing still. Sarah, we've covered a lot. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience listening that we've not covered?
I don't think so. I mean, I would welcome anyone that is interested, that, you know, isn't familiar with Future of Field Service or the Unscripted podcast, to come and check it out. You know, my hope is they would find something valuable. We introduced a new series of the podcast, Frontline Unscripted, in March. And so I've been taking a turn interviewing field engineers and other frontline employees, just as sort of a monthly addition to our typical podcast, which is geared toward leaders. And you know, we've only published 4 episodes so far. I've learned so much. You know, it's been really interesting to incorporate that voice. And, you know, in my eyes, it's sort of a test for the leaders that I speak with that talk about how important the voice of the front line is, you know, giving them an opportunity to listen more and hear what is on everyone's mind. So if anyone would like to check it out, everything is at futureoffieldservice.com and on LinkedIn. And I'm always open to feedback or ideas and new connections. So.
That's great. That's great. Well, Sarah, thank you very much for sharing your views and your experience with us today, and for being so honest and entertaining. It has been a pleasure. And thanks again to our viewers and listeners for your interest in our discussion. What did you think of our talk today with Sarah? What did you learn from the discussion? See you next time. And please, if you liked this discussion, hit the subscribe button.